Hereby I open this academic ceremony at Maastricht University. My name is Ton de Goeie. I am the pro-rector of the ceremony and the chair of the degree committee. First of all, I would like to welcome Mrs. Nikita Poole, and she will defend in public her academic thesis, From Tobacco Policy to Person, Multilevel Influences on Smoking Cessation. Welcome all members of the degree committee, in particular the three supervisors, from left to right. Professor Gera Nagelhout, she is Professor of Health Promotion and Health and in particular Health and Well-being of people with a lower socio-economic position at Maastricht University. Professor Floor van der Brand, she is Assistant Professor of Smoking Cessation, also at Maastricht University. And Professor Mark Willemse, he is Professor of Health Promotion, in particular of Tobacco Control Policy. I will introduce the five opponents later during the ceremony. Welcome the audience here in the aula, and I would like to welcome also the audience of the live stream. May I invite you to present a summary of your thesis, and I wish you success in the coming hour. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Dear Pro-Rector, dear committee members, colleagues, family and friends, both here and online, I'd firstly like to thank you all for being here. And in the following 15 minutes, I'll give a short summary of the contents of my thesis. And it may be that I need to stop and cough for a moment, just so that you know. I think we're all well aware that smoking is harmful for your health. And although many chiefly associate it with lung cancer, smoking is also linked to chronic conditions such as COPD, type 2 diabetes, stroke, and coronary disease, just to name a few. By quitting smoking, it is possible to significantly reduce your chances of smoking-related ill health. For instance, your stroke risk drops to that of a person who never smoked only 2 to 5 years after quitting. In recent years, an important turning point for tobacco control in the Netherlands has been reached. In 2018, the Dutch government unveiled their National Prevention Agreement, an agreement made by more than 70 organizations in the Netherlands, such as health insurers, patient organizations, civil society, and local governments, to tackle smoking, overweight, and alcohol consumption. The target for smoking was set at fewer than 5% of adults and no young people or pregnant women smoking by 2040. We call this a smoke-free generation. In striving for a smoke-free generation, we need to consider that certain population groups experience a higher prevalence of smoking and greater difficulties with cessation than others. Inequalities in smoking cessation based, for instance, on socioeconomic position, which is a measure of a person's societal position based on income, education, and occupation, highlight this inequality. Those with a low socioeconomic position are more likely to be more addicted to nicotine, experience more stress and less support from their social environment, all of these things making it harder to quit. As such, we see a difference in smoking prevalence of 10 percentage points between those with a high and low educational level. Prevalence differences based on gender and age also remain. These and other inequalities in smoking and cessation can be understood with the Dahlgren-Whitehead model, the rainbow model, a model of the main determinants of health inequalities. The model places the individual at the center, with increasingly distant environments surrounding them. However, that does not mean to say that the most distant environments, such as the political environment, necessarily have the weakest influence. My thesis looks at facets of smoking cessation that are at play at different levels. The first aim of my thesis was to explore how individual characteristics such as age, educational level, and sex or gender influence the reach and effectiveness of smoking cessation interventions. We examined this aim in light of two types of interventions: mass media campaigns and behavioral smoking cessation counseling. So to start with mass media campaigns, these are important for comprehensive tobacco control, but may not work well or equally well for everyone. This could be due to, for instance, a campaign not reaching everyone equally, or being made in a way that some people connect to more than others. We studied the exposure of two mass media campaigns, Stoptober and You Can Really Quit Smoking with the Right Help, and studied the effectiveness of the two campaigns on changing behavioral markers for quitting, and looked at whether these effects varied based on individual factors. Stoptober is an annual campaign that encourages people to quit together for the month of October. We found exposure to the campaign was associated with increased quit attempts, particularly among those with a low and moderate level of education. However, an adverse relationship was unexpectedly found for those with a high level of education. Exposure to the campaign was also associated with lower self-efficacy, which is the belief that you are able to quit. This could, of course, be because those who tried quitting realized that it would be more difficult than they had previously expected, and so the belief that they would one day succeed in quitting was negatively impacted, perhaps temporarily. The campaign You Can Really Quit Smoking with the Right Help was targeted at smokers with a low socioeconomic position and was meant to inform them that their cessation support could be reimbursed. We found that the campaign exposure was associated with increased quit intention for those with a low level of education. However, again, an adverse relationship was found for those with a high level of education. As I mentioned, we also examined individual differences in cessation when receiving behavioral counseling. Behavioral counseling is the most effective way to quit smoking. However, quit success can vary depending on individual characteristics. There are also varying modes with which cessation counseling can be delivered, by telephone, in person, and online, and in different settings, such as individually, among a group of strangers, or with your colleagues. We compared telephone counseling with other delivery modes for differences in quit success. We also wanted to see if any individual characteristics played a role in the likelihood of quitting. After 12 months, we saw no differences between telephone counseling and the other modes of counseling, suggesting that you can choose whichever mode you prefer. When we looked at whether quit success in the different modes was dependent on individual factors, we saw that women, younger participants, and those with a lower educational level were less likely to be abstinent at 12 months. We also looked at whether someone was being treated for a medical condition when they enrolled. Here we saw that those with a psychological condition, such as bipolar disorder or depression, and those with a respiratory condition, such as COPD or asthma, were less likely to be abstinent at 12 months. These findings on individual quit success echo that of previous studies. Next, my thesis looks at smoking cessation in the neighborhood and work settings. With these two studies, we aim to identify areas for improvement for the reach, participation, and sustainment of interventions that are designed to help people quit. Workplaces can be effective settings for providing smoking cessation support. However, with low participation rates reported, it is important to understand the barriers and facilitators for employees. We carried out 19 interviews with current and former smoking employees. Some of the interviewees had experience with the cessation program and some did not. We found that employees could be better reached and encouraged to sign up with a proactive, personal, and non-judgmental approach. This means not relying on digital promotion, especially for those whose work is not desk-based. Factors that made participation easier included allowing employees to participate during working hours and at a convenient location, And lastly, making the smoking cessation support part of a broader vitality policy also promotes a sense of fairness for employees who don't smoke. Not everyone will be reachable through workplace initiatives, particularly those who are the most vulnerable or disadvantaged. Community-level health promotion interventions are regularly utilised for disadvantaged groups. However, gains are often short-lived as such interventions are seldom successfully sustained. One study found that only 43% of health promotion interventions in disadvantaged communities were successfully sustained for more than 2 years. We interviewed 15 key stakeholders to find out which factors are important to sustain community-level interventions for smoking cessation in low socioeconomic neighbourhoods. The interventions in question were implemented at least 3 years prior. From the interviews, we identified a number of factors that influence sustainment and formulated 5 key recommendations. Firstly, to secure structural long-term funding for interventions. Second, to maintain enthusiasm and involvement of stakeholders by meeting regularly and providing updates on progress. Thirdly, to support professionals in their role by offering training and time to discuss smoking cessation with their clients. Fourth, to ensure that the intervention is integrated within existing initiatives and current working practices. And lastly, to plan for sustainment from the outset. This last one seems obvious, but it was mentioned as something implementers regretted overlooking. Implementers need not do this alone, of course, and can discuss this with the team of stakeholders. Lastly, we conducted 2 studies looking at the retail environment. We examined the influence of the retail environment on people who smoke and how a number of major retail-based tobacco policies were covered in the news. The retail environment plays an important role in impulse purchase behaviour, which is defined as buying something when you were not planning to. They were often triggered by environmental and situational cues, such as point-of-sale promotional displays or being around people who are smoking or purchasing tobacco. Minimising impulse purchases is particularly important for people who are trying to quit smoking to prevent relapse. We surveyed 1,200 Dutch adults who smoke to find out how often they'd been exposed to tobacco in the retail environment and how often they'd made impulse purchases to see if the two were linked. We also looked at whether certain groups of people were more likely to be exposed to tobacco and whether they were more likely to make impulse purchases. To begin with exposure to tobacco in the retail environment, we found several individual factors that were linked, namely having a higher intention to quit, trying to quit in the last year, being younger, buying tobacco nearly every day, and living in a disadvantaged neighbourhood. These were all linked to greater exposure. We found that almost all of these factors were also linked to greater likelihood of making an impulse purchase, with living in a disadvantaged neighbourhood as the only exception. When examining the link between exposure to tobacco and impulse purchases, we looked at 6 different exposure types. We found that almost all of them were linked to making impulse purchases. Only seeing smoking accessories was not linked. And lastly, news media coverage can influence support for and the implementation of tobacco control policies. We analysed newspaper coverage of 3 major policies that affect the retail environment: a tobacco tax increase, plain cigarette packaging, and a point-of-sale display ban. We looked at the general tone of the article and of each policy, and the presence of the tobacco industry or its allies, which are those who represent the industry or financially benefit from the sale of its products. We coded whether they were mentioned or quoted in the article or whether they authored the article themselves. We categorised all of the opposing arguments we found using the existing framework of industry arguments. Our main findings were that the news coverage peaked during politically relevant events, such as policy debates, and that the most dominant opposing frame was economic, often highlighting how the policies would affect sales, tax income, and jobs. We also saw that the coverage specifically relating to the display ban and plain packaging was more often negative than positive. This negative coverage was predominantly accounted for by articles in which the tobacco industry and its allies were present. The findings of my thesis are the basis of a number of recommendations for research, policy, and practice. Firstly, the introduction of a phased restriction of tobacco sales to specialty shops has a potential implications for people's smoking and purchase behaviour. So it is important to evaluate the effects of the measure. And given its novel nature, this evaluation shouldn't be limited to the impact on the individual, but should also examine the response of the tobacco industry and the retail market. This will provide valuable insights for other countries considering similar measures. Given the differences we've seen in quit success in standardized counselling, future research should also aim to better understanding of whether targeted individual level counselling is more effective than non-targeted counselling. Lastly, future research should consider taking a systems thinking approach, where the issue of smoking is looked at as a whole rather than breaking it down into parts. This could provide deeper insight into areas of the system that need the greatest attention and the effects of changes to that system. There are also several recommendations applicable to policy and practice. Firstly, recommends that the Dutch government expands upon current infrastructure to support smoking cessation, including structural funding for mass media campaigns, community-level activities, and the reimbursement of more than one quit attempt per year. The implementation of a licensing system for points of sale could also help to address disparities in both retail density and exposure. Looking towards public discourse on tobacco control, we saw peaks around political events. Civil society should use these events to promote positive tobacco control frames and refute industry claims. And lastly, cessation support providers should be aware that younger participants, those with lower educational levels, and those who smoke more heavily are more likely to drop out of smoking cessation interventions and should take measures to stimulate participation among these groups. So to conclude, we've demonstrated how determinants of smoking behaviour can be influenced at different levels, and that quitting smoking doesn't look the same for everyone. It is important to make sure that groups do not get left behind when developing and implementing new interventions, and that the interventions be delivered with a scale and intensity that is proportionate to the level of need to ensure health benefits across the social gradient. Thank you for your attention. I hand the work back to the Pro-Rector.
Thank you for a clear summary of your thesis. The opposition will be opened by the chair of the Thesis Assessment Committee, Professor Matti Kroone. She is Professor of Health Promotion and Community Care at Maastricht University. And she is also Secretary of this committee. Mm-hmm. Professor Kroone.
Yeah, thank you. Dear candidate, I thoroughly enjoyed reading your dissertation, and I would like to congratulate you and your supervisors. You examine smoking-related interventions across various socio-ecological levels. For example, these differences in campaign exposure between lower and higher socioeconomic positions, or the differences between men and women in effectiveness. I find them really interesting, because I also found that in one research that gender makes a difference, for example. But that's not what I want to discuss today. So, I will start my discussion with chapter 5. And you explore the key determinants for sustaining community-based approaches. But it's difficult not to become cynical. Yeah. As many of the barriers you mention, such as funding and the temporarily aspect of the interventions, they have been identified in numerous previous studies. Yet we still struggle to overcome them. And I'm already 30 years in this research, so give me hope. So what gives you the confidence in the future of smoking cessation initiatives or other initiatives regarding health? So could you give me some hope?
Highly esteemed opponents, thank you very much for your compliments and your question. Hope. That's something I think we definitely need at the moment.
Yes.
In tobacco control. More so than in previous years, definitely. No, I agree the funding question is something that continues to come up in research and in practice, and is going to remain difficult to address because we're not in a tobacco control island. There are other issues at play, especially at the community level, that also warrant attention. But where I think we can hope is that we have actually come incredibly far with tobacco control. As a country, we stand in 4th place on a long list comparing other countries and how they're faring and how they're doing in tobacco control. So we're really not doing that badly. But that doesn't mean to say that we can stop now and our job is done. There are definitely still things that can be done that I think can make a real difference. As I mentioned, the phasing out of the points of sale, I think is quite a promising measure that is already happening. We've already seen the ban in supermarkets. And with the licensing system as well, I think that's something that could potentially make quite a large difference to not only the physical environment around us and people's exposure to tobacco, but also just in terms of denormalizing its use as well. So that's something that gives me hope. And when it comes to the community level, indeed, a lot of these things have been identified previously in research, but it is, of course, important to make sure these findings reach people whom it concerns. Yeah. So, for instance, with the results of the research, we put together a handbook for professionals who are wanting to do this sort of, implement these sorts of interventions. So I think that's something that's really important to keep doing to make sure these things reach people. And it is something that we have to do together.
Yes. So yeah, I was also, because there are other community approaches at the moment about smoking cessations. How do they work? Do they have the same problems, or do you think they have already managed to overcome them? For example, these 45 communities that started now with smoking cessation approaches.
The 45 mentioned in the study were health promotions generally for disadvantaged communities.
Oh, they were not only on smoking cessation?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
No. But yeah, a lot of the barriers that were found in that study, obviously, we see again with the smoking cessation community interventions.
Yeah. Thank you. I have another question, because the other thing that we also come across frequently is the recruitment. So, and you actually mentioned that, or you suggest using a less intensive recruitment strategy. And I was wondering, what is a less intensive recruitment strategy? So could you explain more about it? And is it, how would it work in a community?
Yeah. Well, I talk about how 2 different community interventions used. One used a group-based, they had a group-based intervention. And so they had to recruit people and wait for that group to start. So they'd already been recruited, and they might have to wait a month or 2. And the people, the stakeholders behind that intervention said that they found it very difficult to sustain that practice because they had to be very intensely recruiting people in very short periods of time. Whereas in another setting, they had individual cessation counselling. And so the recruitment went a little bit differently. They could recruit as and when they had conversations with people, either through their practice with the client or in the community itself.
So would you say then if you are not able to do, if you have a group setting, and then you have to think differently about this recruitment, or would you say if it's more intensive, then would you say, okay, you prefer this individual cessations support then?
Not necessarily. I mean, I was looking at it purely in terms of how to sustain it. Yeah. There's definitely merits to group-based interventions as well. I think it just means you might have to make a bit more of a plan in how you're going to go about recruitment, how you're going to let other relevant stakeholders know, okay, a group's approaching and it's time to start talking to people again, rather than maybe enthusing someone and then they have to wait for 2 months and then the motivation to participate may ebb away again.
Yeah, I'm now reflecting of this, because I'm involved in group care in pregnancy, so that's a group. So I was wondering, because I'm reflecting about whether you could integrate this smoking cessation activities also in this group care setting. And 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 we are currently exploring ways to write a proposal on that. So if you were to support me in writing this proposal, what would your ideas be when you would like to integrate smoking cessation into group care during pregnancy?
Mm-hmm. I think the two can complement each other very well. Obviously, it's a priority target group, women who are smoking and who are pregnant. I think it would be important from the first session really to have the conversation about smoking. I'm sure they've already heard a lot from their healthcare providers by that point.
And not everybody will smoke in this group,
no.
I assume.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I suppose it would depend on the group, whether they felt comfortable sharing that as a group, or whether a smaller group of people perhaps would be open to discussing that with each other, what it means to them, and what quitting would mean to them as part of the contents of one of the sessions. And I think if there's maybe only one or two, and it's maybe through not being prepared to have a broader conversation or another reason, then that's still something you can have one-on-one with the person.
Yeah, so you will combine it. So actually say, okay, I will use the strategies, maybe discuss it during the group, and maybe they can support them. That's the nice thing. And then afterwards you have some individual advice.
Yeah.
Well, I will come back to you on that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krone. The next opponent is Professor Hans Bosma. He is a professor in social epidemiology at Maastricht University. Professor Bosma.
Yep, thank you. Dear PhD candidate, let me first congratulate you with your inspiring dissertation. And I would also like to include the supervisory team in these congratulations. In your dissertation, you show in detail how difficult it is to do something about smoking, and at the same time ensure that the measures are not only beneficial for people with a high income, as often occurs. Your findings are mixed. Some measures work well, others less well, and sometimes they are more beneficial effects in low SES groups and sometimes not. It's fascinating how you show in the last chapters how exposure to tobacco in whatever form occurs more often in low socioeconomic neighborhoods, and how the tobacco industry manages to set a negative tone in news reports about the measures that the Netherlands has taken against smoking. It's really fascinating how that works. So good work. I, of course, also have a number of questions that I would like to discuss with you. In the discussion on the barriers in the workplace in Chapter 4, you mention that some employees are too busy working and they do not have time to participate in smoking cessation programs. And the question arose to me, would work stress not only be a barrier for the usual smoking cessation programs, but might it not also actually be itself, work stress, the key determinant for or one of the key determinants of smoking, and maybe therefore also as a possible target? Work stress is also much more common in low socioeconomic status groups, particularly low control, low autonomy at work is important, and it is known, I've shown it myself years ago, that the work stress is also related to smoking in people, independent of even socioeconomic status. So, don't you think that would it not be more effective to address the work stress instead of doing the usual smoking cessation programs? If you tackle the work stress, you maybe also help tackle the socioeconomic differences in health, in which smoking is indeed a very important determinant. Why not address work stress and do something on that?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and your question. Work stress. I don't think it has to be one or the other, and not every employee will need to have that addressed, either now at all or before they can move on to trying to quit smoking. It's something that should be discussed, I think, with the employee themselves, whether that is something that plays a big role. We've written a handbook recently for employers, in which we also mention that now there may well be lots of other things at play in their lives other than the smoking cessation that you might have to deal with first. And so yes, it's good to address or at least map out what those problems might be. That being said, there are also smoking cessation interventions out there that incorporate stress as part of the contents of the intervention. So that is another option, especially if an employer has lots of people who say that that's something that is playing a role.
But
yeah.
in my opinion, it should not be, and I'd like to hear your opinion, it should not be as stress counseling that people, low-educated workers, have to go to a course to cope better with stress. Do you know of interventions indeed that actually do something on the work stress itself, maybe with a different leadership style or giving the workers more control, something like that? Mm-hmm. Maybe more concrete, my question, if you talk about stress included in interventions, is it solely doing something on the stress in the worker that he or she is better able to cope with the stress? Putting the problem in the worker?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the details of what exactly is discussed within the stress components of these interventions I'm not aware of. But no, you could definitely say it's perhaps for some people not sufficient to receive just that as part of the intervention, whilst everything else in their employment environment remains exactly the same. No. So that's something where perhaps the smoking cessation coach could talk to the employer to see what arrangements can be made there as well.
Yeah, I agree fully. I maybe have another question a bit related, because you also looked in another setting, not only in the work setting, you looked also in the neighborhood setting. And there it struck me that one of the respondents, who is a program leader in such neighborhood interventions, he or she indicates that there is too much of an integral approach that is focused on other problems that are not so easy to solve. And attention for smoking is snowed under, it is, he or she says. And in the discussion you indicate that this can be a problem for the sustainability of smoking interventions in low socioeconomic neighborhoods. And here again, my question, what does it mean if those other problems, that the integral approach is also doing something about, whether these other problems are the true underlying problem, but causing stress in people, various problems in low socioeconomic neighborhoods, various problems in the environment, but also causing stress, and maybe making people not easily able to quit smoking because they are happy to smoke, because it gives them relaxation in a certain way. So, thinking of effective intervention, would it not then also be better, also even for smoking, would it not be better to do something in an integral approach, the complete neighborhood, all the problems there are, also with housing quality, etc., but also the social fabric in a neighborhood? Should we not do something about that? Rather than very specific on the smoking thing. Mm-hmm. If you solve the total problems, maybe everything is gone.
Yes, I think in a world with unlimited resources, that would be fantastic, that we would be able to tackle everything. I know in some neighborhoods there are so many different interventions that are going on at the same time. And I imagine at a certain point you will have to compete for the limited resources that there are. So yes, in an ideal world, that would be good. And for smokers themselves, I think it depends. As someone who works in the neighbourhood and wants to set up an intervention for smoking or a more integral approach, I think it's an important part of their role to go into the neighbourhood and to find out what problems are actually at play. What to residents, what are their concerns, what do they need help with? And based on that information, weigh up what the most suitable intervention would be for that community.
Okay. Very good, thank you. The West, no? Okay, I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Bosma. The next opponent is Professor Jasper Been. He is Associate Professor of Perinatal Public Health at Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. Professor Been.
Thank you. Dear candidate, also on my behalf, congratulations for an excellent thesis, and I'd also like to extend these to your team. It's a very nice combination of qualitative and quantitative work on a range of very important tobacco control policies. So I see a lot of policy hooks there, and in that sense it's glad to see you in a position now where you can actually turn on some of these indicators. But I also have a couple of questions, and first I'd like to challenge one of your propositions. So I'd like to invite one of the paronyms to read out proposition number 9, please.
Involving those who are directly and indirectly impacted by an intervention in its design is important for its success.
Thank you very much. So as a tobacco industry representative, I'd be very happy with this proposition. Because that means that I would need to be involved in making policy also in countries about tobacco control. So can you explain to me why I am wrong and why in fact your proposition is wrong?
Yes, highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and your question. Yes, I should probably go back and amend that with a little asterisk, not the tobacco industry. I do think it's important that especially when we're talking about community level interventions, that we speak to the residents to whom it concerns. And that's more what I was getting at with the proposition, of course. But with the tobacco industry, we have Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and Article 5.3, which at the government level, obviously they can't have influence, they can't speak with them. With politicians. So that's an important correction, I think, for the proposition.
Yeah, so I guess we can then agree that it's correct, but with the asterisks. Yeah. Okay, thanks. And I'd like to discuss chapter 3 with you. It's a very nice study where you used real-life data and used that to compare the effectiveness of smoking cessation interventions. And as you also highlighted in your talk, lower educated people are much more likely to smoke. And you show also in this study that they are much more likely to drop out of interventions, and that if they continue the intervention, that they are also less likely to quit. Well, I guess we all agree that that is an issue that needs to be addressed, particularly if we don't want to further increase health inequalities in the Netherlands, which I also think we agree we won't. So can you provide a solution to this? Because this needs to be tackled urgently, I'd say.
So for looking specifically at the group.
Yeah, so how can we make these interventions more tailored to people in lower socioeconomic status so that they are actually more effective in these people?
Yes. I think firstly looking at the circumstances with which they're able to participate with the intervention is a good start. So thinking about things like the location of the intervention, we're talking about a group of people, and we are generalizing a little bit here, of course, who may not have the same access to a car or public transportation due to where they live or for other reasons. And so the location is important. It's somewhere that perhaps is known to them, familiar.
You showed that the online interventions are as effective, so that shouldn't be a solution, should it?
Well, the online interventions could be an option for those who feel comfortable using an online intervention, but not everyone will be, of course, either be comfortable or have access. But for those who are comfortable and have access, that is, of course, a fantastic option for people to be able to do it from the comfort of their own home, say, also with telephone counselling, the same.
Yeah, I realize it's a very difficult question, which isn't easily solved. I don't have the solution myself. I'm just wondering, I didn't see whether the dropout was selective in each of these interventions. So were people more likely to drop out before the actual intervention started or was finished in one of these interventions? And could that be a hook to maybe select the most appropriate intervention for people?
Yes, I'm also not sure whether that's something we looked at specifically or whether we looked at dropout per characteristic. I believe that's what we looked at. But indeed, if you would see a difference, that is perhaps something you could, sort of a line inquiry, you could further follow to see whether that works better for that group of people. Yeah.
So that might be something to still look at then.
Yes. Yes.
And while you provided excellent insights into the effectiveness of these individual level interventions, you also say, and it's been discussed in Chapter 5, that community-level interventions are important, particularly for those people in lower socioeconomic circumstances. What I was missing is a comparison of the relative effectiveness of the two, and maybe that's also related to the costs. I mean, we are currently in a state, you refer to it, that we are looking at prevention. It's much too costly, and we are reducing our investment in prevention. So should we be investing in the community level interventions or in the individual ones, taking into account the comparative effectiveness and the costs?
Mm-hmm. Well, within a community level intervention, there will be individual smoking cessation counselling or perhaps a group-based counselling. So that's sort of, I see there's sort of one and the same. The community level approach part of it is more focused on the fact that there are people within the community, healthcare professionals and other professionals, who are involved in talking about smoking cessation with residents or clients, and hopefully also referring to them to that individual or group level counselling.
So they can actually make each other more effective. Is your point?
Yes, I see it as one and the same in a whole approach. Yeah.
And maybe specifically for this lower socioeconomic status group, you mentioned in the discussion somewhere that incentives might be a way of improving the effectiveness. Do you see a room for this in the Netherlands? Provision of financial incentives to increase the reach and also the effectiveness of smoking cessation interventions?
I think in certain settings, definitely. There's fantastic research from my co-promoter looking at the workplace setting specifically and the use of financial incentives there. And I think that's a particularly good setting because obviously with a financial incentive, someone has to pay them, and the employer, also benefits from their employees not smoking anymore, and has the means to provide financial incentives. So that's one setting, for instance, where I think that's could be quite appropriate, and has also been found to be effective.
So we need employers to also invest more, maybe in terms of incentives in their employees. Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I noticed that my time is almost finished, so I give the word back to the prorector. Thank you for the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Been. The next opponent is Professor Mirte Kuipers. She is assistant professor at the Department of Public and Occupational Health at Amsterdam University Medical Center in Amsterdam.
Thank you.
Professor Kuipers.
Dear candidates, I too would like to congratulate you with this fantastic work and also to your supervisors. It was really a pleasure to read. It addresses various different topics, and I also want to point out the work that you did in many ways to actually bring your results to policy and practice. So I would like to compliment you with that specifically as well. But of course, I also have some questions on the contents. So I first want to go to chapter 6, and this chapter is about the exposure to tobacco in the retail environment and the relationship with impulse purchases. I first would like to ask a clarifying question in table 3 on page 141. Because here you present 3 different models that show this association between exposure and impulse purchases. And which model would you say I need to focus on when looking at your results?
I would say the first of the 3 that are listed, in which we looked at the sources of exposure separately. Now, we obviously did the other 2 models to look at, now say, for instance, you're seeing cigarettes. You might be seeing cigarettes at the checkout because you've seen someone else buy them, a family or friend. And for that reason, we also looked at everything together. But in terms of its relevance for policy or practice, I think it's also important to look at the exposures on their own for what they are and whether they themselves have are associated with impulse purchases. And so from that one, we do see that most of them are associated.
Right, okay. So, but that means that they're not actual confounders of each other, or how would you say they relate to each other then?
Now, they could be, which is why we performed the other 2 models. But to have only performed the other 2, I think you also miss information.
All right. So, but then I wonder whether it wouldn't be better to only have one combined measure of exposure. If you say, like, we want to know if all of them are, or if the whole is important, why still separate them out in this way?
I think because a lot of the research up until now had looked at point-of-sale displays specifically, and we had looked at obviously some other sources of exposure that received far less attention in the literature. Obviously, if you take that all together, then you would miss that information. So this is sort of a first foray, I suppose, into looking at these other types of exposure.
All right. Yeah, which is actually quite interesting because when we look at the model where you do control for other exposures, we don't see an association or not statistically significant with exposure to tobacco advertising, which was unexpected for me. So how does this work? Is that overcorrected, or is there indeed not that big of an association when we control for other exposures?
Well, in these models, we're looking at everyone who shops at regular supermarkets when they still could, and other types of shops, and also specialty shops. So only specialty shops, of course, have the point-of-sale display ban, and sorry, the other way around. Yeah. They exempt from it, and there is still advertising available. So when we look at the whole sample, only a subset of them will have even been exposed to advertising. And so it's potentially a power issue that
right.
It's not significant.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure because I don't see very wide confidence intervals when you do control for it. So, but I can see that there's some error there, perhaps. Still, though, if you look at your conclusion, you're quite confident in stating that there's an influence of these exposures on impulse purchases, which is a causal way of phrasing it. So how strong is the causal evidence? So there might be an association, but is there does the exposure actually cause the impulse purchase? What evidence do we have for that?
I think it's fair to say it's not something we looked at specifically in this study. For instance, to perhaps measure that, now what we didn't ask was, did you make an impulse purchase when you saw X? That would be a more direct way of asking it. In terms of other research, I'm not sure to what extent causal research has been done on point of sale promotional displays. There has been a lot of research done, but whether that's looking at it causally, I'm not sure. What is interesting, there were 2 studies from Australia that have looked at, also looked beyond point of sale displays and looked at whether people feel the urge to purchase cigarettes purely from seeing that it's available for sale. And they did that, I believe, using a diary study. And so people said they walked past the shop and then they felt like they wanted to buy cigarettes. Now, hard evidence for a causal relationship, that is not, of course. But I think that's roughly where we are at the moment with establishing that.
Right. So this, with these different types of methodologies, we might say that there's triangulated evidence that it's likely that there is a causal association, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then I can actually agree with you on the conclusions and also the implications, because you, of course, also recommend a licensing system. Now the government has plans to actually implement the ban on tobacco sales, or to limit it to specialist shops in 2028 instead of 2032. What do you think? Is this a good development? How is this going to work out for us?
From the perspective of someone invested in tobacco control, this is obviously a positive development. 4 years earlier, that's good news.
But do you see any challenges in that as well?
There are potential challenges. Obviously, the planned legislation was announced quite a few years ago, and so retailers have perhaps been using those years in planning their business strategy for the coming years. And so, if it does indeed get moved to 2028, as the government would like to see, then that may pose some challenges for retailers who now need to, re-look at what their plans are. I think in terms of implementing a licensing system, I don't think that makes an enormous difference, because that has to be implemented once it's only available in specialty shops anyway, and that will just happen in 2028 instead of 2032.
Right. All right. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back over to the prorector.
Thank you, Professor Kuipers. The 5th and last opponent is Professor Tim Huyts. He is Professor of Positive Health at Work at Maastricht University. Professor Huyts.
Thank you, Prorector. Dear candidates, like the other opponents before me, I'd like to congratulate you with this very interesting thesis, and my congratulations also to your supervisors. I was particularly impressed with the variety of approaches and perspectives that you've used in the thesis, and what I really appreciated was the integration of the various layers of the model that you're showing now as well. So I think we still have a tendency to focus on one layer or the other, and I think bringing them together has been really valuable. So my compliments for your work. I do have a few questions, of course, and my questions will focus on Chapter 4, in which you've conducted a qualitative study to assess how reach and participation can be improved in smoking cessation programs in the workplace. So I have a few questions for you about this chapter. And the first focuses on how employees can be reached and stimulated to take part in these programs. And the results show that this actually differs quite a bit between employees. So, for example, some employees would like to be approached by their direct manager, others by HR members. For some, email or intranet works well. For others, it doesn't. So there are various other domains in which you really see that this works differently for different people. So my question is how employers or organizations can best deal with these differences. So one size doesn't fit all, but yeah, what advice would you give organizations? How do you tackle these differences that you find?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you very much for your compliments and your question. Indeed, a one-size-fits-all approach is only going to get you so far. I think now putting aside the resources needed, perhaps, for one moment, ideally an array of approaches in order to reach your employees would be advisable, as, yeah, not everything is going to work for everyone. I think also, especially if you're a manager, say, and you work closely with your team, that you may already yourself have an idea of what might work for your colleagues, as well as already having an idea of who smokes and who doesn't. So that's something else that you can use to inform your approach, of course.
So suppose you're a manager, like you mentioned, and you do have a sense of who smokes and who doesn't. You do have some sense of preferences. So how do you operate then? Could you say a little bit more about that? So is this about equipping managers with the right skills, or is it about having the right people available in the organization? So is it something that managers should take on board themselves, or is this a matter of delegating to others? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that will depend on the size of the organization as well. Obviously, in a small organization, the role might fall more to managers, and in a larger organization, more by the HR department, who, especially if they are more involved in the vitality of their employees, and there may be other programs going on. So I think that will vary. It definitely doesn't hurt to start with a digital approach, with email and intranet, for instance. But I think the core message of that study is to not stop there, essentially. That you're not going to reach everyone that way, and that also people appreciate it when you do talk to them about it. And even in stimulating that conversation can, in of itself, encourage people to talk about it with their other colleagues, which may also in turn motivate them to participate more than reading an email or having one chat with your manager.
Thank you. You also mentioned vitality programs, right? So what intrigued me about your chapter was that you mentioned, well, you gave various recommendations for improving the reach and participation of these specific programs on smoking cessation, but you also recommended to try and integrate this into broader vitality programs. Now, as an organization, I know from experience working with some organizations that time is limited, money is limited, so they might come to you with a question, well, what do I choose, right? So should I focus on strict smoking cessation programs, or should I really invest in these broader vitality programs? So suppose you would really get this question, like, okay, tell me what to do. Well, one or the other. So what would you recommend?
Are you able to give me some more information on what a typical vitality program would consist of, if not smoking cessation support?
So I would think of physical activity, nutrition, well-being more generally, mental health support. Now we even see things around financial support, other domains in the personal life that are addressed through vitality programs. So it varies quite a bit, but given that you mentioned it yourself as something that you would recommend, I thought, well, do organizations necessarily have to do both, or can they be integrated, and does the focus necessarily have to be on smoking?
Well, I think what I recommend is that the smoking cessation be integrated as part of the package with the other elements, so that it's not a one or the other situation. Not everyone will need to make use of the smoking cessation support, just as well as someone might not need to make use of the nutrition support or the financial support. So in that way you do have something for everyone, and as I say, that can promote a sense of fairness. So I think that would be my answer, yeah.
If I turn it around a little bit, right, I'm just going to try to get a bit closer to what organizations can really do. So are there scenarios where you would recommend that organizations would not use this broad vitality program, but just use a strict smoking cessation policy?
If they were able to look at the profile of the employees they have and see that smoking prevalence is particularly high in their organization, then that is something that you could recommend as a focus, from the employer's perspective, particularly within, the implications that might have for smoking breaks and sick leave.
Okay, thank you. A final question that I have is connected to this, and it focuses on so-called human-centered approaches. And I should introduce briefly what I mean with that. So what we see is that a lot of organizations are trying to develop HR policies that really involve people's whole lives, right? So they look at them as people in a broad sense. So even at our own university, we don't talk of HR officers anymore, but people in development advisors, right? So to what extent do you think these smoking cessation programs typically already look at people's personal lives? So for example, do they consider life events that happen, or stressful issues in relationships, or illness, or things like that? Could you say something about that?
Yes, they definitely include focus on those sorts of things. Normally the first few sessions is to prepare someone to make the quit attempt. And then beyond that, the sessions look at and discuss difficult moments someone might experience where they may be tempted to start smoking again, and may also include creating action plans to make sure that they have a structure in place if they do encounter those sorts of situations. And that will be tailored to the individual a lot of the time. So there's definitely attention for bigger life things that can hamper cessation.
Mrs. Poole, you understand that the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis, and in particular the quality of your defense, and please await our return here.
All right, please.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
was good timing.
Mrs. Poole, the committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and in particular the quality of your defense. And in view of this positive verdict and also taking into account the previous qualifications that you have attained, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Nagelhout is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom and law. I invite now your supervisor to take the floor.
Do you promise always to act according to the principles of scientific integrity, truthfully and with due care, transparency, independence and responsibility?
Yes, I promise.
By virtue of the authority vested in us by the law, and in accordance with the decision of the doctoral committee present today, I hereby declare that you, Nikita Poole, receive the degree of doctor with all rights and duties associated with this by law and custom. As evidence thereof, I hereby give you the degree certificate, signed by the rector, secretary, and other members of the doctoral committee, and bearing the great seal of the university.
Dear Dr. Poole, dear Nikita, what a pleasure it is to warmly congratulate you. Also on behalf of the PhD supervision team, Gerard Nagelhout and Mark Willemsen, on obtaining your PhD. In your thesis, you used a rainbow model to structure your studies, and I think it's also a beautiful metaphor for your PhD journey. You have traveled across the rainbow, following a colorful path, and finally arrived at the pot of gold. Your scientific journey began in 2019 when you started working at IVO Research Institute, where Gerard was working at the time. Together with Barbara van Straten and the investigative desk, Gerard had received a grant from the health funds to research the tobacco industry. The challenge, an ambitious project with a heavy workload in a short time. And Gerard was looking for someone who was smart, fast and pragmatic. And not too perfectionistic. That's how you came into the picture, recommended by Professor Stef Kremers, who knew you from your cum laude master thesis. At your first meeting, you immediately made an impression. Smart and fast indeed, as expected, and you also described yourself as pragmatic and not too perfectionistic. That last part turned out to be slightly different in practice, but despite the high demands of the project, you managed to deliver everything on time. The job at IVO not only appealed to you professionally, but also it gave you the opportunity to move to the Randstad and to live with your boyfriend and now husband, Pieter, in Delft. The project required a lot of work in Dutch, but you convinced us that you would learn the language quickly, and you did in an impressive way. In the beginning, we agreed to start our meetings in Dutch and switch to English after a few minutes. But soon, those Dutch parts lasted longer and longer until eventually we communicated entirely in Dutch. You have even integrated so well now that you make now Dutch spelling mistakes in English, and that you had to ask your mother to check the spelling of your thesis title even. Although your first project lasted only a year, you were soon asked if you were interested in pursuing a PhD, a so-called patchwork PhD. In the summer of 2020, you officially started your PhD journey, and I became your daily supervisor. It was a bit nerve-wracking for me as well, because you were my first PhD candidate that I supervised. But fortunately, you made it easy for me, thanks to your qualities as a researcher. And through our weekly meetings, we quickly found a great way to collaborate. Since you worked at EVO in The Hague and I was based in Maastricht, our discussions took mostly place via Zoom. On top of that, it was during the COVID-19 pandemic, so we were both working from home. That gave me a glimpse into your living room, and I saw that you are a true board game enthusiast with an impressive collection. But working from home also brought extra challenges, especially for you. Your studio in Delft was very small. And when you and Peter had Zoom meetings at the same time, you had to relocate to the bathroom or the bedroom with your laptop. And your workspace was so cramped that Peter's arm and shoulder were always visible when we had a meeting. I don't know how you managed it, but despite these circumstances, you remained incredibly productive. After a long time, we finally met in real life for a meeting, and you gave me a warning beforehand that you were very short, which was, as you can see, to me, pretty funny. Fortunately, the post-COVID period brought new opportunities. You could finally attend conferences and present your research, such as the ECTO conference in Madrid, where we also had some fun days with fellow researchers. And during your first project, you collaborated with investigative journalists and published fact sheets on the role of the tobacco industry. And this work was not only appreciated by the health funds, but also caught the attention of the tobacco industry itself. You were even invited to a meeting where they wanted to share their good work, in quotes, in harm reduction. After much deliberation, you decided to accept the invitation, knowing that you would regret missing the chance to hear their side of the story. And this also shows that you're always up for a challenge. Beyond that meeting, you conducted interviews with national and international experts in tobacco control, and as a newcomer you were then, you managed to connect with the biggest names in the tobacco research field, which is an achievement in itself. And moreover, you proved yourself to be a vigilant advocate. For example, when Maastricht University accidentally promoted a grant from the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World, which is funded by the tobacco industry, you immediately reached out to the grant office, and without hesitation, you strongly advised against any collaboration with this organization. Your years of work have resulted in a rainbow of outstanding scientific publications. The journey wasn't always easy. There were a few moments of frustration when an article seemed endless. And the first publication may have felt like an uphill battle. But as the saying goes, you can't have a rainbow without a little rain. So once you reached the peak, momentum took over, and from that point on, one publication after the other followed in quick succession. You absorbed feedback which swiftly and consistently delivered high-quality work. Your independence and strong sense of responsibility made working with you a true pleasure. Beyond academic impact, your dissertation has also proved valuable practical insights. From the guideline on embedding smoking cessation interventions to providing the scientific evidence for sine fumas intervention, as well as numerous fact sheets, blogs, and opinion pieces published in the Limburger. With your broad knowledge of tobacco control and network that you have built, you have now secured a fantastic new position at the Gezondheidsfonds Roerhoek-Vrij. And I am convinced that you will be a pot of gold for them as well. So on behalf of Mark, Gera, and other colleagues, we look forward to continuing collaborating with you in your new role. But first, it's time to celebrate and to toast your PhD. I want to sincerely congratulate Peter, your family, and your friends with this incredible achievement. Thank you for your dedication and for the fantastic collaboration. And on behalf of the PhD supervision team, Keep chasing the rainbow, and may your future be as bright and colorful as your journey has been so far.
Esteemed Dr. Poole, dear Nikita, I congratulate you with your doctorate, and I congratulate you also on behalf of Maastricht University. And I would like to share some impressions of the committee with you. You gave a clear and well-illustrated presentation, a summary, and I hope that we called it the talk for the people that do not know, which are not experts in this. And I hope that people in the audience here and in the live stream has very well understood how you worked the last couple of years and what the result is. The thesis is of good quality, it's well written, it has a relevant subject as well. And it's also broad and diverse in perspective, methodology, and in scientific approach. And it has integrated the various levels of the studies. And that's very peculiar. And also, we have seen that the majority of studies has been published already, and the rest is, I think, underway. With respect to your defense, you gave adequate answers to the number of questions that were posed to you. And you answered them with nuance and responded also with excellent use of language. And we appreciate that, and we are satisfied with your defense. I do not only congratulate you with this result, but also your three supervisors, Professor Gerard Nagelhout, Professor Mark Willemsen, and Professor Floor van der Brand. Congratulations with the results in terms of this thesis, in terms of the publications, and in terms of an excellent defense. Congratulations. And I would also like to include in my congratulations your family. They are sitting not only on the first row, but standing here as well. So congratulations with the result that you have seen today and heard today. And also I would like to include not only your family, but also the people present here in this aula and also the followers of the live stream. I'm quite sure that also a lot of family and friends will have looked at the live stream. I would like to thank all members of both committees, both the thesis assessment committee and this degree committee. Congratulations, or not congratulations, but thank you for critically reading the manuscript and having a lot of questions and also an interesting discussion that we have heard. So thank you for that, and I would like to thank in particular the external members of the committee. Thank you for being here and contribution. Your contribution is appreciated by Maastricht University. Before I close this ceremony, I would like to invite you for the reception, which is in the rafter. It's quite easy to find if you leave this aula and you turn around near the elevator to the right, and you will find the rafter easily. We will take a picture with you in the middle on the stairs in the hall. And I would like to invite to go with us the close family, so the Paranymphus and the family here on the first row. Hereby, I close this academic ceremony at Maastricht University.